Hi, thanks so much for coming to my workshop on developing self-compassion for writers. I'm Mallory. I'm an author of 2 young adult speculative fiction novels with queer female protagonists. I'm also a practising mental health professional with a special interest in compassionate mind theory. And today I'm here to talk about how we as writers can develop tools and strategies for self-compassion. Writing can be an amazing, enriching source of joy and connection with others. However, it also seems to be a pretty common experience that writers are our own worst critics. And that means that sometimes anxiety, shame, and self-criticism can get in the way of really being able to enjoy and make the most of what writing brings to our lives. So the compassionate mind theory of evolutionary psychology was developed by the psychologist Paul Gilbert. This workshop is intended to be a very brief overview of that theory and of the ways that writers can start to apply that theory and practice to our lives and the way we approach our craft. And if you find that the content of this workshop resonates with you, there are a lot of really excellent compassion-focused books and resources out there, which I very much encourage you to take a look at. So, first things first, what do we mean by compassion? For lots of people, the first associations are going to be with things like niceness and fluffiness. But the model that I'm referring to here is made up of 6 components: empathy, sympathy, distress tolerance, sensitivity, non-judgment, and care for well-being. And actually, when we think about the most truly compassionate people, for me, those who come to mind are people like Martin Luther King and the suffragettes, people whose eyes were really open to the suffering and injustice around them, who were really attuned to it and were compelled to act to alleviate it, no matter how difficult and painful that action was. So true compassion involves strength, courage, commitment, and wisdom, and it's often about doing the difficult thing, and that is the understanding that underpins this workshop. So first, we're going to have a very quick science lesson, and the first thing to explain is that Gilbert's theory tells us that humans have 3 main systems of emotion regulation: our threat system, our drive system, and our soothing system. And we're going to come back to these 3 systems later on, but one thing that I want you to bear in mind throughout this workshop is that our soothing system is really important. It plays a really important role in helping to regulate our threat system. And our threat system is emotions like anger, anxiety, shame, all of those really difficult and tricky emotions that can sometimes get in the way of us enjoying our lives. So, next key point is that humans have tricky brains. Amazing brains, but also ones that can trip us up. And it's really important to understand that this is not our fault. It's all to do with the way our brains have evolved. Our brains are made up of 3 parts, and they all developed at very different stages in our evolution. And they can sometimes almost behave as 3 separate systems with their own competing priorities. The oldest and most powerful is our reptilian brain. It goes right back to the start of our evolution, and it controls the mechanisms that are fundamental to the survival of all animals, so food, shelter, reproduction, and defending against threat. Next came our mammalian brain, which controls bonding with others, social emotions, nurture and care for others. And then much, much later came our human brain, which does logic and imagination and reason, and thinking about the past and the future and how we appear in the minds of others. As I said before, sometimes these different parts of our brain don't talk very well to each other, particularly when there's a lot of strong emotion around. And because the reptilian brain is concerned with our basic survival needs, what it will do is essentially try to overrule all the other parts. So when we're anxious, it's a bit like a fire alarm going off. It's very difficult to ignore. And this is also why we can sometimes have that experience. There's that kind of disconnect of knowing something logically, but not feeling it to be true. So our new brain knows it, but our threat system hasn't quite got the message. So our reptilian brain and our threat system how does that work? Well, it was really useful back when the thing we had to worry about most was things like running into bears. It jumps to conclusions, it overestimates threat by default, and it's much more likely to remind us of the bad as the good, because for much of our evolution, that was what helped us to survive. In the modern world, what that can mean, for example, is that I can pretty much guarantee that if I read 10 amazing reviews of my book and one meh review, it's going to be the meh one that I'm going to lie awake at night thinking about for the next 6 months. So if we couple our threat system with our new brain capabilities, our imagination, our theory of mind, and we marry that up with our threat system's tendency to jump to conclusions and overestimate threat, and skew to the negative, then we can see how easy it can be to get caught in tricky and unhelpful brain loops that can really affect our self-confidence and the way that we feel. And the other thing that's really important to help us make sense of our responses is our evolution as social beings. If anyone's ever said to you, why would you worry about what other people think of you? It doesn't matter. Well, our new brains may well know this to be true, but the fact is, it's not that simple. When we think about the fact that humans have evolved to survive and to thrive as a group, we're pack animals. And what that means is that the idea of social rejection is incredibly scary to us, and it sets off our reptilian brain threat response in a very specific way by triggering the emotion shame. So all emotions have a function, and the function of shame is as a social moderator. It's triggered when we fear that something innate to us is going to lead to our rejection by our social group. It's the sense that I am bad, as opposed to guilt, which is I've done something bad. And writing is such a deeply personal thing on so many levels. When we share our work publicly, we're not just putting our technical skill up for scrutiny, we're putting our ideas, our ideals, the things that are innate to who we are as people. And criticism of our writing can feel like an attack on something that's innate to us and who we are, and that can bring a sense of shame. And because the function of emotions is to trigger action urges. The action urges associated with shame are usually to silence ourselves, to hide away, or to withdraw. So not to go to that writing workshop, not to show our friend that story, or even to open our own notebook and read our own writing back to ourselves. It can be totally paralyzing. It can be extremely painful. And hopefully all of this is helping to explain that when we get anxious about sharing our writing, about entering a competition, or releasing a book, or submitting to an agent, we're not being silly or illogical. All of it makes perfect sense in the context of the way our brains are designed and what sharing our writing represents. And this is where practicing self-compassion can help. The fundamental underpinning of compassionate mind theory is this: we didn't choose the design of our brains. We didn't choose our biology, our genetics, the circumstances in which we grew up. We all just find ourselves here doing the best we can with what we've got. And at the same time, and this is the beautiful bit, neuroplasticity, so our brain's capacity to be flexible, to change and to adapt, is an amazing thing. And we are all in the present moment just one possible version of ourselves. We have this boundless capacity to grow and change and develop. And there's an increasing body of evidence to say that self-compassion can help us to do this. So what does self-compassion look like in practice? Well, first I'm going to talk about how motivation works. So the parts of the brain and the mechanisms that are responsible for activating us to pursue important goals and resources are what Paul Gilbert refers to as our drive system. It's the bit of our brain that's in control when we press the submit button on a competition, when we sit down and pitch to an agent, when we walk into a writer's group and read out our work to a room full of people. Our drive system can either be associated with positive emotions, so excitement, pride, joy, and bonding with others, or with our threat system emotions, so it can be the fear of not achieving, failing, or falling short that drives us to action. So I'm going to encourage you to take a moment now and think about what it is that tends to activate your drive system. And it can be a real mixed bag. And as I talk, it's the release week for my second novel, which I've been working on for a really long time. I'm excited, I'm proud. I've been really hyped to share it with the world, and I've also been super nervous. My stomach's been churning when I think about it. I've been having weird stress dreams all week that I've accidentally released it without the final chapter. My attention keeps being captured by my threat system, which is asking very helpful questions like, what if all the reviews are terrible? What if no one buys it? And this is normal, and it's totally understandable. And if I don't do something to soothe my threat system and activate and connect with the positive emotions of my drive system, there's a good chance that I'm going to miss out on the fun and exciting and amazing parts of that experience. So, one way we can connect with the positive emotions of the drive system is to figure out what our values are as writers and what concrete behaviours we can engage in to work towards specific goals that are within our control. And we can think of values here as being a bit like the points on a compass. They show us the direction we want to travel in, while goals are the concrete steps and behaviours we can take to keep moving in that direction. So one of my values, for example, is to write socially responsible and nuanced mental health representation. And a concrete action I chose to take in line with that was to find sensitivity readers to read for my character with PTSD. Another of my values is to contribute to widening queer representation in YA fiction. So if somebody says, for example, that my work isn't fast-paced enough for them, or they didn't like it because it had a queer romance, I can remind myself that that is okay. Those things aren't part of my values. That's not why I became a writer. I've held to my values. I can be proud of that. I think it's fair to say that many writers and many humans generally hold ourselves to unreasonably high standards that are wildly different to those we would apply to anybody else. So when you look at your goals and values, I would like to gently encourage you to reflect on whether they are actually reasonable and attainable. And since we're all humans, a good place to start with this is, would you hold other humans by those same rules and standards? For example, if your goal is write a book that everybody loves or write a perfect first draft, would you encourage other people to keep those goals? How come, or how come not? Having very perfectionistic standards often comes hand in hand with having a very keenly developed inner self-critic. And if this sounds like you, I would like you to take a little time to reflect on whether you can identify any beliefs you might hold about the usefulness of your inner self-critic or your critical voice. And this might sound like an odd thing to say because, often our first reaction is that it really sucks to have a very vocal critical voice. But often the reason it's stuck around is because on some level we have this sense that it's helpful to us or it keeps us safe. So here are some things that our self-critic might want us to believe. Without it, I'll never get anywhere or achieve the things I want to. If I'm not hard on myself, my standards will slip, I'll get lazy or sloppy. Being hard on myself shows I care about my mistakes. If I don't criticise myself, I'll become arrogant and overconfident. Being hard on myself will stop me embarrassing myself. It will protect me from other people's criticism. So our self-critic, our critical voice might try to convince us that we need it. But if we think about what our self-critic would be like if it was something outside of us, something we could see and hear that followed us around grumbling or yelling, what happens if we sit down to do something we love every day, and every day we have someone leaning over our shoulder going, well, that sucks. That's not as good as Bob's writing. That idea has been done a million times before. This is boring. No one's ever going to read this. Does that make us want to leap out of bed and open our manuscript? It certainly doesn't for me. Of course, part of being a writer is about being able to continually learn to critique ourselves and receive constructive feedback from others. And if we go back to the idea of doing the difficult thing, here the difficult thing is being able to develop the capacity to reflect on our work and identify places we can improve, accept feedback gracefully, and do the work to make our writing better. And to do all of this whilst at the same time celebrating our achievements, acknowledging that we're doing the best we can and not beating ourselves up or getting caught in frustration and shame for not being perfect. Self-compassion is hard, If the things I've been talking about so far have resonated with you, it's going to feel like a lot of hard work and possibly quite scary to actively try to develop your compassionate self and challenge your critical voice. And that is okay, that's totally understandable. But we can learn to challenge it and develop a more compassionate, encouraging voice to help us move towards our values instead. So how do we start with this? Well, we can try this. First of all, it's really important to learn to notice when a critical voice is piping up. Sometimes it can become almost automatic, so I really encourage you to look into the practice of mindfulness to help with this. And then treating what the critical voice says with curiosity and objectivity rather than taking what it says as fact. We can ask ourselves, am I holding myself to a different standard than other humans? Is there objective truth in this critical thought? If there is, would I say this the same way to another human being? If not, how would I rephrase it? What kind of tone and facial expression would I use when I communicated this to somebody else, if I really wanted them to learn from it and reflect on it? As all writers know, both what we say and how we say it has power, and this is just as true when we're talking to ourselves. Our new brain capacity for imagination means that what we think and what we imagine can trigger emotions in the same way that outside events can. So if you're saying to yourself, come on, it's not that hard, everyone deals with this, but you're saying it in this exasperated, angry, frustrated tone, or if you're saying to your friend, here's my novel, it's just a first draft, sorry you have to read this rubbish. Both of those things are still self-criticism. So too is over-apologising when you're reading out loud to your writing group, or keeping your head down so that you can't see people's reactions, or choosing not to enter that writing competition because you think you've got no chance. Our compassionate voice and statements need to be congruent in words and actions, tone and body language. So here's a challenge. Next time you find yourself tempted to apologise for your work, minimise your efforts, or make a self-deprecating joke, try saying something validating and positive about your work instead. Try saying something like, I worked really hard on this piece, or I tried out writing in first person for the first time and I'm pretty pleased with how it came out. If you're discussing your worries about your work or asking for feedback, try making your statements factual instead of critical. So I will own here too the fact that my critical voice has a fondness for hyperbole. So for me, putting that into practice might look something like saying, I struggled with this scene and I'm not sure this piece of dialogue works, rather than this whole chapter is the worst thing anyone has ever written ever in the history of writing, which is very much something my critical voice might try to say. Self-deprecation is normal, it is natural, it's a self-preservation mechanism. If we get in first and say the thing we fear we're going to hear from somebody else we think, it won't hurt as much, we won't be so disappointed. But it will still hurt, of course, and all we're doing is invalidating ourselves, our efforts, our work and skill and dedication. And there is a reason that in the LGBTQ+ community we have pride. It is because it's the opposite of shame. We're owning and celebrating and sharing with the world the truth of who we are. And if we can do that with our writing too, that is a beautiful and amazing thing. As I say, compassionate action is hard, and it is something that writers have to do over and over. Creating something can be an incredible and magical experience, and it also brings a pretty high chance of exposing us to rejection, criticism. It's a constant journey of self-development and growth in the pursuit of improving our skills and our craft. It's hard, for many of us it's worth it, but it takes courage and commitment, and if we're not sensitive to our own difficult feelings, if we don't develop the tools to look after ourselves and tolerate our distress and understand why it's important to do that, what we can be left with is anxiety and loss of motivation and low self-esteem. So let's have a look at what self-compassion looks like in action. So the situation, an email has just landed in my inbox. It's feedback from a critique partner. I've asked them to be brutal and pull apart my manuscript. I now regret this decision. So what does my new brain do? It starts imagining just how bad the feedback might be. It goes as far as to suggest that my critique partner might not even want to be associated with me anymore, just once they've realised just how terrible a writer I am. I told you that my critical voice has a flair for the dramatic. It says things like, you're never going to make it, there's no point even trying. And all of this naturally kickstarts my threat system, which not only is going to make me feel physically tense and wobbly, it's also going to start to remind me of all the other times I've received feedback that didn't feel awesome, all the other times I think I've fallen short in some way. It's going to suggest helpful behaviours, such as perhaps I should never open the email, perhaps I should preemptively email my friend back apologising for existing, and maybe I should drop my laptop in the sea for good measure. So if we think about actions in line with values, obviously the action that's in line with my values is to open the email, but even here there are different ways that we can approach this. So option 1, I do not recommend this, by the way, is that I grit my teeth, I tell myself not to be ridiculous, I invalidate my anxiety, and I just open the email, I swallow the frog, and read the feedback. My threat system has properly woken up at this point, because not only am I anxious, I'm telling myself I shouldn't be anxious, I'm being silly for it. So my threat system is awake, my focus is narrow, I'm really attuned to the negative, I'm more likely to interpret things as negative even if they're not, and I'm much more likely to miss any positive feedback. My self-critic is going to say, you're rubbish, you're never going to make it, your friend thinks you're an idiot. Maybe in an attempt to protect myself, my threat system is getting kind of defensive and angry and going, what do they know? They obviously don't get your writing at all. Don't bother listening to them. So, what kind of behaviours are these sad and angry and anxious and ashamed parts of me going to want me to do? Well, the angry part might want me to not speak to my friend or even send them a snarky email back. Or the anxious and ashamed part might think about cancelling the writer's workshop I was supposed to go to next weekend. Or the sad and demotivated part of me probably wants me to put my manuscript away and never look at it again. And all of those actions, understandable as they are probably going to leave me feeling even worse about myself and my writing, and they are certainly not in line with my values and not going to move me any closer to where I want to be. So what would my compassionate self do instead? So the first thing is that I'm going to be sensitive to my feelings and needs. I'm going to recognise and validate that opening this email is potentially going to be stressful. I'm not just going to tell myself not to be so silly. I'm going to be sensitive to my own difficult feelings so that I can respond to them appropriately. The second thing I'm going to do is remind myself of what I know in my wise mind. I'm going to remind myself of the reasons I asked for this feedback in the first place, the positives I'll get from it, how these fit with my goals and values. I'm going to remind myself that my friend cares about me, that I trust their judgment. I'm going to try to remember the positive feedback I've received in the past. And perhaps I'll tell myself something like, this is going to be kind of hard, but I know I'll get through it. I know it will be worth it. And I'll say that in a warm and encouraging and positive tone. Number 3, I'm going to, in recognition of the fact that I'm feeling kind of stressed thinking about this, I'm going to create the most stress-free conditions possible to act in line with my values. I'm going to commit to acting with courage. I'm going to open the email, but I'm going to give myself what I need to do that. So I'm going to give myself peace and quiet and space to read the feedback. I'm not going to do it when I'm at my desk at work or when I'm just about to take my cat to the vet. When I do sit down to do it, I'm going to try to activate my soothing system. Remember what we said before about how your soothing system balances and regulates your threat system. So I'm going to try and switch my threat system off, or at least dial it down a little bit. So I'm going to do that before I start. So maybe I'm going to do a breathing exercise. Maybe I'm going to do something else I find comforting. I think about what brings me comfort. I'm going to do that first. And I'm going to continue to do that as I'm reading. I'm going to pay particular attention to any positive comments because I know that I'm more likely to forget those or skim over them. I'm going to put a pin in anything that I find particularly challenging and come back to it later to give myself time to reflect on it when my emotions aren't quite so up there. I'm going to continue to try to activate my soothing system as I read the feedback. I'm going to stay tuned into my thoughts and feelings during and after, even if those thoughts and feelings are difficult to sit with, because if I know what I'm feeling, then I can figure out how to respond to it with warmth and kindness and understanding. And then I'm going to think about what those emotions want me to do afterwards. What do I need that is in line with my values, that is compassionate and nurturing and kind? So if I'm pleased or excited about the feedback, perhaps I'm going to call my friend to yell about it. Perhaps I'm going to celebrate in some way. If I'm a bit down or disheartened, perhaps I'm going to plan a debrief chat with another understanding friend, or I'm going to plan a fun or distracting or soothing activity. I'm going to give myself permission to step away for a bit, and I'm going to commit to coming back when I feel calmer, when I feel ready. So we're at the end of the session now, so thank you all so much for watching. I really hope that you found it useful and that you'll come away with some starting points and ideas about how you can develop your compassionate self to help you get the most out of your writing. And no matter what point you're at in your writing journey, these are skills we can all use in our day-to-day lives. So remember, something doesn't have to be perfect to be good enough. In fact, it doesn't have to be perfect to be amazing. So look after yourself, celebrate your achievements, focus on your values, be proud, and keep doing the difficult thing.